Australia's most popular family SUVs, but most of the time they're almost entirely confined to the city. For this test, we wanted to try something different. Get them out and about, be a little bit adventurous. We're on Kangaroo Island in South Australia, where cars like this are commonplace. But just how far can you push them? First things first, these aren't proper off-roaders. Underneath, they use the architecture of regular passenger cars, but with a chunkier body on top. They also ride higher, which means that you can drive over some more challenging terrain without scraping things underneath. Beware though, because despite the looks, most SUVs these days drive only the front wheels. Of course, Subaru is different. It's built its reputation on all-wheel drive, so unlike the rivals to the Forester, all Foresters drive all four wheels all the time. And this diesel model is arguably the best suited to getting off the beaten track. It's a 2-litre turbo diesel, 4-cylinder, 108 kilowatts of power, 350 newton metres of torque, so fairly modest outputs, although obviously that torque is produced really low in the rev range. And the CVT transmission, it does a really nice job of harnessing that performance, so at any speed pretty much just open it up and you've got a reasonable surge. The engine's pretty quiet too, so if you are heading on a longer trip, that makes a big difference. To keep things fair, we've chosen a diesel in the Mazda, which by default brings all-wheel drive. It's a pretty familiar unit, 2.2 litre, 4-cylinder turbo, with 129 kilowatts of power, so a fair bit more than the Subaru. So no surprises then that this one wins the performance race. But of course, we want to know what it's like off-road, to go for a bit of an adventure and test it out. Now, Subaru knows most people are never going to do this sort of thing, but it's surprising how much thought they've put into making sure that a Forester can go a bit further than your average SUV. The bumpers, for example, they're tapered at either end, so they're less likely to catch on anything you might be trying to get over. The ground clearance, the amount of space between the body of the car and the ground, is a little bit higher than your average, so again, trying to keep things out of harm's way. And all that means you can get the suspension working a little bit harder, and you can feel that over this sort of stuff. You can feel that it's trying its best to keep in contact with the road. The all-wheel drive system, again, it's a bit smarter than your average one, sending drive to those wheels all the time, but on top of that we've got this X mode switch, which once we hit, just tailors the computer a little bit better to try and get you over a few things, and certainly over some of this stuff it's doing a really nice job. Not that you're about to go following a Land Cruiser into the bush, that's not what this is about, but it's pretty impressive what it does do. So there are limitations then, but on this sort of stuff, these sort of gravel roads, the Mazda is fine, it's pretty comfortable. You do notice it doesn't have quite as much wheel articulation, so the suspension is less willing to move up inside those wheel arches. Instead, it's more likely to hang a wheel in the air. And when you do get to some of this for things around, so obviously that front spoiler is a tiny bit lower, so we're just making sure we're picking around the more challenging things. The body too is slightly lower to the ground, so again you want to be careful of underneath. Like all soft roader SUVs, there's not a whole lot in the way of underbody protection, so you don't want to go scuffing it underneath too much. But look, I think for a lot of people this will surprise them, the sorts of things you can get away with. You want to be a little bit careful, you don't want to go obviously damaging the car. It's not designed for full-on off-roading, but pick your way around and you can make some decent progress. Have a go at this. This is what these cars are about big time. It's finding these little areas that you wouldn't quite be able to get to in a Corolla or a Camry. So you don't need a Land Cruiser, but you need something with a little bit more ability, and this is perfect. As for which one I'd choose, look, there's no doubt that CX-5 is a better car on road. It's more refined, it's got better performance, it's generally a nicer car, but in terms of off-road, the Subaru nails it. Just the fact that you've got a little bit more ability, you've got that X mode button, the bumpers aren't as susceptible to damage, perfect.